What's up, guys? It's Dr. Murphy, Murphy Medical Associates, and our team at coronatestct.com. Today is May 7th. That's right, May 7th, 2021. It has been at least a week since my last live stream, and let me tell you why. I've been working with Dr. Yo and Dr. Patterson to scale out our long COVID clinic with the team at NCell DX. I'm very excited to be collaborating with Dr. Yo and Dr. Patterson on the immunologic markers of long haul COVID. Long COVID, long haulers, whatever you want to call it. So I have been non-stop the last 2 weeks trying to find answers for these patients that are suffering. That's why I've been away. Let me tell you that I've learned a tremendous amount of new things and also edified all my previous knowledge that we had. And in the last 2 weeks, I've digested over 200 scientific articles. That's right, I've read over 200 scientific articles. And I'm ready for battle against long COVID. We're here for you. Today on our live stream, I want to welcome you all. Today's date again, May 7th, 2021. Our live stream today, we are going over vaccines in kids. That's right. Is it worth it or not? Today on Murphy's Medical Minute. Stay tuned. All right, guys, let's get started with the show. Shall we? Let's get started with the show. Today's date again is the 7th of May, 2021. And to reiterate yet again, COVID-19 is airborne, but the kids are all right. Vaccines for children today, presented to you on Murphy's Medical Minute. Before we go into kids and vaccines and why we do it, I just want to remind everyone of the risks. The risks of COVID are very bad, especially in adults, especially in the obese, especially in the elderly. Kids, not as much. Doesn't mean they don't get COVID. Doesn't mean they don't suffer. But when we force suffering on our populace by messing up vaccines like Sputnik did the other day, we have some problems. So as a reminder for vaccine hesitancy, there's real reasons for vaccine hesitancy. In this case, Gamaleya Sputnik decided to inactivate their adenoviral vector. And the adenoviral, the Ad5 vector, is replication competent for the Sputnik, which is a surprise, as we really don't want our adenoviral vectors to be able to stay in our body and create more create more infections. In addition to that, the Sputnik vaccine is not very effective against B1351, which has the E484K mutation. So what did we find? We found out that 70% of all Russians were vaccine hesitant, and one could see why. In addition, I don't know if you remember the Baltimore factory issue where we had issues with J&J and AstraZeneca. And now in Denmark, we find out that the likelihood of cavernous sinus venous thrombosis is around 1 in 44 to 45,000 people. You have to question, will the vaccine cause more harm than good? And I'm out here putting a conjecture, just saying what other people think. I know my opinion, and the answer is vaccines are one of the keys to getting out of this pandemic. But you really have to question the following. Are the kids okay, or are we going to hurt them more? So as a reminder, Johnson & Johnson published their data, which I think is probably going to be around 1 in 250,000 to 1 in 500,000 receive a cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, otherwise known as cavernous sinus thrombosis. And I firmly believe that we'll probably see it around 1 in 250,000. What's shocking is the fact that the AstraZeneca vaccine data now, at least out of Denmark, appears to be 1 in 44,000. You know, when we get the flu vaccine, you get a 1 in a million risk of something called ascending paralysis or Guillain-Barré. And I tell people that. I tell everyone who got a flu vaccine, I say, listen, I have to tell you, we got a 1 in a million shot of you getting ascending paralysis. It usually goes away. That being said, I have a patient, really nice guy, who got ascending paralysis from the influenza vaccine. And guess what? He still has residual symptoms. Did it go away? Yes, but he still has residual symptoms. Still to this day after the flu vaccine. So the problem that we have here is that COVID is airborne. COVID's airborne, and the CDC issued these guidance, and everyone's made fun of it because it's, you can do this, but don't do that. I think when Trevor said, you can set a fire, but only if you come from a long line of firefighters. And so it's poor messaging, it's poor defining of what's a big crowd. We know that indoor air quality matters, yet so many schools are not monitoring air quality. And so how do we protect these children? And do we even need to protect these children? In fact, remember I had a live stream a while ago where we talked about the big lie, which is that kids don't get COVID. Well, if kids don't get COVID, why the hell are we vaccinating our kids? Why are we advocating for vaccination for the kids? Kids get COVID. We know that that big lie is false. That's why we call it the big lie. Another big lie is the fact that kids don't spread the virus. Well, that's also false. And it's magical thinking. It's magical thinking to think that kids don't spread a virus. And the preliminary data are not all the data, which is why we always have to keep it in evolution. Which is why now I've swung back to the fact of, put simply, maybe kids do better, but not all kids. And how do we identify those? And how do we keep their air clear? How do we clear the air for the kids? And are we going to keep masks in schools? The theme here is going to be to trust but verify. And when we talk about kids and vaccination, it's a bigger kettle of fish. Why? Because to not be reductionist and to not use over-aggressive terms. Parents who decide not to vaccinate their children are not evil. They shouldn't have their children stripped away from them. You know, in certain countries, and I think this happened in the UK, the child protection agencies actually took obese children away from their parents. They actually took obese children away from their parents. Why? Because of this up here, right? And this is one of the big problems with governmental overreach. If people in government are cancel culture, if people in government are willing to say, oh, I read a news article, now we need to strip doctors of all their licenses, that's a problem that we have. Why? Because people are going to choose not to vaccinate their kids. It doesn't make them kooks and nuts and outcasts. It doesn't make them narcissists. It makes them want to do no harm first. And who do they care about? They probably care about their kids more than they care about society as a whole. They probably care about their kids more than society as a whole. And they say, when I say life, then liberty, then the pursuit of happiness, they say, yeah, what about my life or my kid's life? And I can't really argue with that. They are thinking non-utilitarian. They are thinking about autonomy and the ethics of that. So are we going to call them kooks because of that? I don't think so. Right? The deal here is simple, right? Most children do well with infection. This is true. Most children. However, we do not have long-term data on childhood infections. The maximum data we have is when the outbreak started in China in November. That's the best data that we have, and I've reviewed that data. Most children do well. Some kids, a subset of children, do exceedingly poorly. And when you look at that, you look at the long hauler index that Dr. Patterson published on, that Dr. Yo treats patients, Dr. Bean treats patients, Pierre Corey treats the most critically ill of us. And I treat patients. I trained in pediatrics before I did internal medicine. And we take care of kids. We take care of kids. a subset of children do exceedingly poorly. How can we identify those kids before they get infected? Before they get infected. And there's not as much robust studies on children. There's not as much data on children. So what's the solution here? I think probably a risk stratified vaccination. Obese children. Okay. Well, what if their parents have long haul COVID? Well, maybe they'll get long haul COVID too. It's tough to tell. We don't have the data on it yet. We don't have the data on it yet. And so let's get some data, right? Let's get some simple data here. Here is some simple data. The Children COVID-19 report. I don't know if anyone follows this, but it's published by the AAP and the Children's Hospital Association. And what do we find out? Most kids recover from SARS-CoV-2. But kids get SARS-CoV-2. Cases are climbing here in Michigan. We can see that. Cases are also climbing in Maine. What's the takeaway? If your general population has a high case count, you probably should not be surprised when kids spread the virus in the schools. You should probably ramp up your air quality. You should probably ramp up masking, and you should probably reduce the numbers of kids in school. And I think that we really need to think about how we make ventilation mandatory. How do we make ventilation mandatory? Cases are far higher now than they were during the lockdown, even in May, in March. When we canceled school, children's numbers were way down. Through the summer, children's numbers way down. Open up the school and we have a baseline increased number. Well, guess what? More long COVID kids. More kids getting infected. The counterpoint may be that more kids then are gaining natural immunity. And is that a good thing? Is natural immunity a good thing? And will it keep the kids from needing vaccination? So how do we identify those kids that are going to progress? How are we going to do that? Well, we know it's real. And I don't think that we need to harp on this again. 15 to 30% of all adults have long COVID. What they found in these Italian studies, which I think are amazing, is that greater than 50% of the kids that got infected had symptoms. Greater than 50% of the kids had symptoms 120 days out. For those that can't do the math, that's 4 months out from an infection, they had symptoms. And of those who had symptoms, nearly 43% were fully impaired. So half of the kids that had symptoms, roughly, were very impaired. Half of those that had symptoms 120 days out were greatly impaired by those symptoms. So it's real. Long COVID kids happens. We got to recognize that SARS-CoV-2 is not the common cold or influenza. The children who are infected suffer the scars long term. So I'm not here to say that kids don't recover from this, and I'm not here to say that the kids who don't recover from this don't do well after. I'm here to say the following. We need to treat our air like our water and make sure that it's clean. We need to treat our children as our most valuable resource. How do we do that? We keep them from getting SARS-CoV-2. How can we do that? How can we do that? We can do that by vaccinating our kids. We vaccinate our kids. And I think we should vaccinate our kids. The FDA is set to authorize the BioNTech vaccine next week. That will be the first vaccine up to date. Let me tell you about the Pfizer vaccine, which has seen adverse effects, whether it's the anaphylactic events, which they thought was from PEG interferon, or the downstream immune effects like the thrombocytopenia that we've seen, and the reported Bell's palsy with Moderna, and the fact that people get Moderna arm in a very vigorous reaction. I'm here to tell you right now, kids' immune reactions are far stronger than adults. The kids' interferon response is far stronger than adults. So what I want to know is, what is the ideal dose? We need to use the lowest doses possible in kids. Number two, how are the children going to react to the vaccine? As I said, the interferon response is stronger in kids. Is this going to knock them out for days? Will an overreaction problem happen? Will an anaphylactic reaction happen? I don't really know, but I want to tell you, take a look at this picture, right? This kid getting the vaccination right here is wearing an Ulta t-shirt. And and no offense, right? High white privilege, whatever you want to call it. This 16-year-old boy in Worcester is getting a vaccination. He's obviously a skier, and his parents have decided that he needs to be vaccinated. Great. I don't want to see a picture in the New York Times of a kid skiing at Alta during winter break getting vaccination. The problem with vaccination is our underserved areas are getting vaccinated less, and the children are going to school. The parents cannot afford to pull their kids out or send them to private Zoom school. Therefore, what I want to see is a push in underserved communities to protect our children. To protect our children. And how do we do that? We do that with vaccination. That being said, there are going to be many states that are going to allow kids exemption. And in the case of religious exemptions for vaccination, you can see here the school map. Take a look up there and over here. LexisNexis data from 2019 show that a significant amount of states allow vaccine exemptions for schools. So are they going to allow COVID-19 exemptions? They're going to be parents who do not want to vaccinate their children with truly an experimental emergency use authorization vaccine with Pfizer. It's just going to happen, and we're going to have to accept it. Mississippi does not allow it. New York does not allow it. Maine, where we saw kids are climbing in infections, does not allow it. California does not allow it. This map below or to up here or to my side here, you can see states that are allowing religious exemptions or personal belief exemptions. One state that's been controversial about this is my state, Connecticut. The mission of the state is to protect the citizens, therefore, they have struck down the religious exemption. The Connecticut lawmakers have removed religious exemption for childhood vaccination. The longstanding exemption had been there for years. It's been a hot debate. I'm here to tell you that vaccination, I believe, is one of the keys to the exit of this pandemic. It's not all of the keys, but it's one of the keys. And we're going to allow children to be vaccinated 12 to 15 years old. I want to tell you a couple of things about how they studied this vaccine. They studied the vaccine. Let's see if we can get up here. There we go. They studied this vaccine by immune response, not whether there would be infection or not. They didn't study it whether there'd be long COVID or not. And what we really want to know, because children do spread this virus, does the vaccine reduce transmission in kids? Does it reduce transmission in kids? Well, are there other ways to reduce transmission in kids aside from vaccination? The answer is yes. It's simple. Monitor the air. Businesses, homes, and schools need to have carbon dioxide monitoring. You know, I took one of my kids to the dentist this morning, and they had HEPA filters everywhere. And I said, that's great, but look, your windows are closed. How are you ventilating? And they said, well, you know, the HEPA filters, they work pretty well. And I said, they work really well when you open the windows and you can exchange your air. And they said, well, how would we do that? Well, you open your windows. Well, the problem is the pollen. I said, the HEPA filters are clearing the pollen. Well, how do we know when we need to open our windows? The answer is simple. Put a carbon dioxide monitor in all of your vulnerable zones. Keep that between 700 and 1,000, and definitely keep it under 1,500. Because if you can do that and keep it under 1,500 parts per million, you're going to improve air quality. And in the dentist's office, it was great. They had a window right there, wasn't open. And you know, the problem is that dentist's office had COVID run through it twice, not once, but twice. And so you'd figure they would be more sensitive than anyone else. And they were. They thought the talismans of HEPA filters were the way to go. And don't get me wrong, we've covered HEPA filters. They work. They work. They exchange air. They clear air. They clear air. They clear air in a very good way. But you need to exchange the air as well. You need to exchange the air as well. And so towns are going to have to be very, very flexible with schools. That's one way to prevent this spread. Kids can transmit this virus. Open the windows. Municipal systems need to pay for carbon dioxide monitors, and they need to pay for HEPA filtration. So what's going to happen? Governments are, rather than focus on the air quality for kids, governments are going to push vaccines in kids, which is going to lead to vaccine hesitant parents saying, what the hell is this, 1984? Is Aldous Huxley correct? Is George Orwell correct? Are they going to force vaccines in the arms of our kids when the vaccines have not been fully FDA approved yet? That's the question. And I don't think governments can force these things without full FDA approval. We're already seeing the lawsuits start to roll in. So what can schools do? Well, they can eat outside. But the pollen, yes, I know. Yes, I know. I've got pollen allergies too. I get it. Can the schools do monthly serologic surveys? Well, I don't think you're going to want to draw kids' bloods all the time. But what about those Buy Next Now cards? Where did they go? Well, listen, I'll tell you, I was wrong. And Michael Mina up at Boston, congrats, dude, right? We're both physicians and physician scientists. I'm here to tell you right now, he was right, I was wrong. If you could test kids every day, and I did, I tested my kids every day using the Buy Next Now, not the Buy Next Now systems, the BD Veritor system. Expensive. I mean, these are expensive tests, $30 a day. Schools can't afford that. So the Buy Next Now cards go in the home. Let the parents buy the cards. It's a good start, right? If we can get our kids checked before they go to school, if they have symptoms, we also need to recognize people don't have symptoms. There are many kids who don't. So focus on the ventilation. Focus on the ventilation. Ignorance is not bliss here. Ignorance is not bliss. But I will tell you this. COVID is bad. COVID is bad. You know, we had the DPH accuse us of ordering all sorts of crazy blood work on people. Their independent consultant said, oh, it's unnecessary blood work. Well, we've got about 250 scientific articles saying that we knew what we were doing. Unfortunately, the government at times does not. And I'm not going to blame them. They've got to run a state. They've got to run a county. They've got to run a town. How do they have the time to, read 250 articles? And so they defer to the experts. But the problem is, in a lot of governmental situations, the experts are nothing more than shills. They are not experts at anything other than political skullduggery. And the public knows that, which is why we have vaccine hesitancy. So it's up to us as parents to recognize that vaccination is one of the keys to exit this pandemic, and we need to demand proper protection for our kids. Is it just vaccination? No. We need to make sure that schools are ventilated properly, but vaccination is a part of protecting our kids. Pfizer will be approved next week for 12 to 15-year-olds. There's no doubt about it. And by the fall, it'll probably be available. Yes, DeFauci, congrats, September. I honestly thought that it wasn't going to be available for kids until next year, 2022. And I put that on a live stream. And I'm going to tell you the following. Vaccine will be available, and it will be pushed hard by governments because they want to protect their citizens. And it will be available from ages 2 to 11. There's no doubt about it. I think the government's timeline will push that forward. They will have data. Now remember, the data that they have is preliminary, and it's not studied the way I would want it studied. I'll say it again. The approvals are based on science that I would not accept. But the federal government needs to accept it. Why? Because they need to put an end to this pandemic. If you look at the unemployment numbers, they're crushed. They are crushed. We totally missed the mark with employment reporting here. And that's because the economy is getting crushed, which is going to lead to dollar printing, which is going to lead to inflation. And I could be Graham Stephan, or I could be Meet Kevin, or I could be any of the other talking heads about inflation, but it's real. When you're paying $6 for a gallon of milk and trying to struggle to feed your family, you have a problem. COVID's effects are long-term. COVID's side effects in long COVID kids is real. I don't want my kids getting COVID. And frankly, I can tell you, in the very beginning of this pandemic, I beat myself up because I thought I brought COVID home back when we thought it was more contact related. I was so upset. I couldn't even begin. I was so mad at myself. And like most parents, we want to protect our kids. And we also want to protect our kids from the rare side effects of vaccination. Because when it's your kid, you'll never forgive yourself. Yes, it's rare, but when it's your kid, you'll never forgive yourself. So the decision to vaccinate your kids. Parents come to me all the time and say, would you vaccinate your kids? What are you going to do? My oldest kid is 15, so I didn't rush for the 16-year-old vaccination of Pfizer. I had time to watch for some data in 16-year-olds. There are more than 1 million 16-year-olds that have been vaccinated. Therefore, I think it's a fairly safe vaccine. But what about for the younger kids, for the preteens? Well, we know that the interferon response is stronger for them. And therefore, I will wait until at least 1 million preteens are vaccinated before I let my preteen get these vaccines. I'm going to wait. I'm not going to be the first, and I'm not going to be the last. But I'm going to remember that vaccination is safer than getting COVID. Vaccinating your kid is safer than your kid with COVID. And that's my stance, and I'll stick to it. All right, so let's see here. I'm going to switch over, see if you guys can see it. Right, you see? Welcome to my new angle. Welcome to my new angle. I don't know whether you guys like it or not, but you can see back here. Take a look, right? The best of Greenwich 2020, a little bit of reading. You know, you can take a look at a little bit of reading that I do. They call me the Dr. Disney guy, right? That's my name, Dr. Disney, because I'm a Disney nut. I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to go to Disney. You have no clue. I wanted to go to Disney so many times now. So many times. But I've held off. I held off. Why have I held off? I'll tell you why I held off. I held off because I wanted more people to get vaccinated. I wanted kids to be able to get vaccinated. I know that vaccination is one of the keys to get out of the pandemic. And if we're not vaccinating our kids, then we're not protecting our own. Right? Remember? What's the bear mean? We protect our own. And I'm going to protect my kids with vaccination at the right time with the right data. And you can too. Just be smart, take care of each other, do your best. It's Dr. Murphy, Murphy Medical Associates, and our team at coronatestct.com. Today's date is May 7th, 2021. And you just watched Murphy's Medical Minute. Thanks.
With